The Fantasmagorium show is proud to present Webs, Gliders, and Spiders, a show with not enough power to have any responsibility. Peter Parker has been revealed to be Spider-Man. The obvious solution is magic. Why make a new villain when we have 5 of the Sinister Six? 6 if you count Venom. All of the Spider-Men are here. Thank heavens for this yearbook. My name is ScottyR37. Cat is... Who is Cat again? Oh, and Steve wants pictures of Spider-Man. Tally ho. Hey, Cat. Welcome to Spider-Man No Way Home.
Hey, Scott.
How are things?
All right.
Good. This is the finality of the Tom Holland trilogy, or the Sony MCU crossover, I suppose.
Until further notice, yeah.
Yeah, and this is definitely 2 movies.
What do you mean?
I think that the first half of this movie is very much an MCU movie, and the second half of this movie is very much a Spider-Man movie.
Okay.
In that, the beginning of it sort of dovetails off of everything that we had established at the end of Far From Home. But now, now that we get all the MCU stuff out of the way, we trap Doctor Strange in the mirror universe. Now we just leave him there for a while we go and hang out with all the Spider-Man people that we wanted to hang out with, instead of being all mucked up with all that MCU stuff. It feels like a definite division between the two of them, and a breakup at the end.
Yeah, but I didn't have a problem with the MCU stuff in the beginnings. That was still the good phases, so. Because again,
one of the things
times we saw 5 Spider-Man movies doing the same thing over and over again, so they tried something different to be more refreshing, and it was.
Absolutely, but the thing is, and this is something that we've been discussing since the beginning of the Tom Holland, is that this is much more of an MCU trilogy than it is a Spider-Man trilogy.
Is it?
I think so, yes. Not until they pull it out in the end.
Well, it's still a Spider-Man trilogy. It doesn't matter if he has connected. Like, newsflash, Spider-Man has existed and crossed over with so many Marvel characters for decades in the comics. It's not like a new thing. So, and it still tells, as we went over, a comprehensive Spider-Man story. It's like we see that, they don't need to hit the exact point of origin again, but you see how he's screwing up constantly and being a bit egotistical and cocky in the first one. In the second one, he's trying to shirk his responsibilities for the sake of just being Peter Parker, and he doesn't get that he can't really, he can't really straddle both of those. And now in the third one is where he has to come to terms with making the choice of what he's actually going to be. Is he going to be Peter Parker, or is he going to be Spider-Man?
And he chooses Spider-Man, which is great. It is a moving forward. Do you feel the divergence between Sony and the MCU, or do you think that the MCU is still going to have a hold on Tom Holland's Spider-Man?
Well, given the failure of the Morbius movie, and
it failed.
Yeah, hard, and then the middling failure of the Venom sequel, which granted was expected because it was still COVID. I think that they have every incentive to renew that partnership, especially with what's been going on with phase 4 and 5, where they're not having their $1 billion averages anymore. And just the other day, Pascal commented that, well, the writer's strike is going on, but once the strike is over, we fully intend to go full steam ahead and keep getting back to talking about that. So it seems like they want to, and why not? It's popular because each of No Way Home managed to make $1.9 billion. And that's far more than any of the phase 4, thus phase 5 projects that even come near at all. So there's popularity for the character. Granted, the nostalgia is built into that, but people like the character. They like where the character ended up. And if you have the promise of potentially a now classic Spider-Man story with just him, with Feige's involvement, given Feige's penchant in the past for better stories than what Sony had been doing with the Garfield stuff and Spider-Man 3, then maybe you can get a really great new Spider-Man trilogy out of that. But we'll see.
Well, I'm glad you brought up Amy Pascal and the business aspect of everything that has to do with Spider-Man, is because at this point, I can't help but see the business aspect of it, the product, the intellectual property, as opposed to the story being told. I didn't feel that this furthered the tale of Spider-Man. I think that this was, as I mentioned in my introduction, a yearbook. This is sort of the greatest hits. Let's rest on our laurels kind of flick.
Well, it's also the resolution to the cliffhanger from the previous film, which is why this is kind of like, in a sense, a two-parter. Because again, the whole, like I mentioned last week, the whole thing in the second movie is that he's trying to shirk his responsibilities constantly. He hasn't really accepted that he has to choose between one or the other. That's what Doctor Strange tells him early on. It's like, the problem isn't Mysterio. It's not that your identity's been revealed. It's that you can't make up your mind about what you want to be. And the end of this movie, because of everything that happens, forces him to make that decision finally. And he's committed fully to being Spider-Man at the end of the film. So that's the storyline, but it is interested in member berries, obviously, because they figure that'll bring a lot of money. Because for a while, they've been entertaining seriously the idea that the plot would involve Kraven the Hunter going after Spider-Man. They came up with all sorts of different kinds of things for what this movie was going to be, because they didn't know if they could get the other actors to come back in these expanded roles. And whether or not they could go, obviously, with the story they went with, hinged entirely on whether they can get those actors to come back. And so they were entertaining those other potential plots, which I take it somehow would have dovetailed to having the same result, him choosing to, giving up his whole life as Peter Parker to basically be Spider-Man. And it would have been interesting to see how some of that goes, because there's certainly member berry stuff here in terms of, like, Sandman, Lizard, Electro, characters that don't get any real resolution, that are just there because, member berries. And so it's in that way, it would have been interesting to see what they would have done if they couldn't get those people to come back. But it still has a compelling story to tell, and they do bring it full circle with him finally accepting the responsibility of what it means to be Spider-Man. And that's why I perceive it as like the second half of Far From Home. It's like finishing that, like his shirking of responsibilities, he had to pay the price by having his identity exposed, and then the domino effect of everything that happens in this movie as a result of him trying to shirk that responsibility. And he has to pay the ultimate price for it at the end of the film, when he decides to go through with a spell that'll erase him from everybody's memories and existence, so he has nothing and nobody.
I think part of the reason why he was comfortable with making that particular decision is because May was dead. And so he felt that he was without a real anchor. And it's just an interesting way to move forward with Tom Holland's Spider-Man. If they choose to move forward, then you are, I suppose, gaining a J. Jonah Jameson, but you're going to lose an Aunt May. There are many.
It's kind of like in the origin story, right? In the other Spider-Mans, is that Uncle Ben dies. He blames himself for that. Realizes, as in the Maguire trilogy, with great power comes great responsibility. He decides that he can't just ignore his powers after that. It's like, I got Uncle Ben killed because I wasn't being responsible, so now I have to be Spider-Man. And we see the same thing in this, where initially when Aunt May dies, he just breaks down and doesn't want to continue. His friends give him a pick-me-up, and he decides that this is what he has to do. Because you're right, he doesn't have May anymore as an anchor. He doesn't want his friends to be in danger, and he doesn't want the universe to collapse in on itself. But he starts over, and it seems like he's doing all right. Like, he's not, like, wallowing in self-pity or depression. It's just like he's trying to figure out how to start again. So as such, all of his MCU entries, all 6 of them, feel like a protracted origin story of a different type.
Yes, I have heard that, and I wish I could agree with it. I do understand where that comes from, and I like where your heart is at. But the problem that sort of falls at my feet with that is that the only reason that it becomes a protracted Spider-Man origin story is that all the other Spider-Men show up to show us what it meant to be Spider-Man in the first place.
Well,
Some of the most engaging things about this movie are not Tom Holland's Spider-Man, but Tobey Maguire's and Andrew Garfield's.
I disagree.
How
I mean,
so?
I didn't feel Toby really had a big moment. Like, he's just kind of there. And Andrew has that one moment when he saves MJ and he gets the redemption. But I thought Holland's character had the more significant moments, like when Aunt May dies, when he makes the decision that I'm going to stick to my laurels here and betray Doctor Strange to do what I feel is right. And then when he finally makes the decision that, one, go through with the spell so everybody forgets me. Two, when he goes to the cemetery to see Aunt May's grave and Hogan's there and he doesn't say anything to try and remind him who he is. And then when he makes the next decision to not obey his friend's wishes and doesn't read the note to them and tell them who he is and decides to leave them behind. I thought those were a lot more compelling scenes than any of the stuff that Toby did or that Andrew did. And again, like I said, if they couldn't get these actors to come back, you would essentially have had the same result. He's going to be Spider-Man. Like, you could ultimately choose that path, but they would have found it through a different character. For instance, it might have been Kraven the Hunter killing Aunt May and him having to come to terms with that, his friends helping him or whatnot. Like, I still think that the end story would have the story of is different from plot. Obviously, the story is Peter having to finally accept responsibility as one or the other. I'm going to be Peter Parker. I'm going to be Spider-Man. Either version, either the Member Berries version or the one that wouldn't have gotten the cameos, you still would have had the scene with Doctor Strange saying you need to make a decision of what you want to do. And I think therefore the outcome still would have been the same. It's just the mechanism or the plot device to achieve it would have been different. Like I said, it would have been like, say, Kraven killing Aunt May or whatnot. So I still think that the story would be the same.
And you keep bringing up Kraven. I haven't seen Kraven in a movie.
Well, no, that was something that was being tossed around a lot in the trades as where they were potentially going to go with it, and whoever it would have been, pick an enemy or what the thing would have been. I think it still would have been the same idea that they were going to kill Aunt May.
You're doing the same thing that I was doing during Raimi's Spider-Man 3. You're talking about the movie they could have made if not for whatever
the story
negotiations of film.
I'm saying the story would have been the same. Like, story and plot are different things. Like, the plot of No Way Home involves the multiverse and bringing in the old Spider-Man and the old villains and blah, blah, blah. But the story, I think, was still going to be the same either way. It was going to be Peter coming to terms with the fact that he has to commit to either being Peter Parker or Spider-Man. He can't have both. At least not the version of Peter Parker he was trying to embrace. He's got to, I think, therefore, the story would have been the same either way. It just, the plot devices and characters they would have used to achieve it would have been different.
It is important to talk about the movie that we actually got, though. In the same way, when we were talking about Spider-Man 3, we have to talk about the movie that we got.
Yeah, I'm just saying that the story, I think, would be the same either way, which is why I still feel it's a protracted origin story.
But we only have one way.
Yeah, I know, but I still feel it's the same. Like you said, you said it had something to do with the Member Berries having everything to do with how that comes about, and I said I disagree. I think the story would have been the same.
But in the movie that we were provided, in Spider-Man No Way Home, because there is the multiverse aspect, and we do get Toby and Andrew, when they all come together, work together, and somewhat because of, and I was going to say especially, so let's go with especially, because for the MCU, Spider-Man, he helps them work as a team based on his experience with the Avengers. Like, there is a lot of catharsis in terms of who Spider-Man across the three universes is based on each Spider-Man learning from the other.
Okay.
And that, whether it had been an internal sort of realization or the coming together of the yearbook of all the Spider-Man, like, I really liked seeing the way that Andrew and Toby and Tom worked together. It was a great mashup. Now, I still haven't seen Into the Spider-Verse.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is my introduction to the multiverse of Spider-Man.
Yeah.
So I still, when it comes to the conclusion of the film, I think that it has a lot to do with the emotional weight that we feel from Sam Raimi's and Mark Webb's movies.
Well, I mean,
And the
again,
incorporation, and that's why I feel like this is two movies, is that we have to bridge Tom Holland's Spider-Man from something that obviously bloomed out of the MCU, and now it is going back to a Spider-Man universe, not, I think, very well represented by having two more Spider-Men.
yeah, but I disagree in the sense that I was invested enough in the Tom Holland character's story arc across the movies that I liked that more than what they did with, Garfield and Tobey being there. It's like, oh, okay, member berries. Kind of like, when they brought back Sandman, they had the opportunity to resolve his whole dilemma that they started with in Spider-Man 3, which is that he just wants to save his daughter, and they didn't bring it up. He's just kind of there for, I mean, he mentions it once. He just wants to get back home to his own universe, to his daughter, but they don't provide any type of like curing him of the Sandman affliction doesn't achieve that. If anything, it makes it worse, because instead of using potentially non-lethal sand to go rob banks and to finance his daughter's health problems or whatever, he's going to go back to being a regular guy using guns or something like that. It didn't resolve anything. Kind of like Lizard, he's there, but it doesn't. It's like, okay, like again, I feel the only character who really had a really great moment from the member berries brought back was Garfield when he catches MJ, because that's clearly a very cathartic like moment for him, because like he had already told that MJ and the Holland Peter that he lost Gwen. He says and he said she was my MJ. I lost her and I can never forgive myself for that. So when he catches this MJ, she looks at him and she knows what he's feeling when she says, like, that's why I really felt something. Whereas the only Toby moment, I guess, is when he tries to stop Holland from killing Norman. I'm like, okay, that was a good moment, interrupted by him getting stabbed in the back, which is like, okay. But I was invested enough in the Holland story that I didn't feel like like, yes, it's cool that they brought the other characters back. Obviously, that has everything to do with why it made $1.9 billion. But that wasn't the prime motivator for me to enjoying the movie and liking it. I liked everything that was in the Holland storyline and the way they presented it in this movie.
And I'm glad you enjoyed it for the inclusion to the MCU as you did. I think that a lot of my enjoyment was from seeing things from amazing, like from the Webb and Raimi's. I've never been all that invested in Tom Holland's Spider-Man. I think that he's too buried in MCU-ness. I've always missed the Uncle Ben, and they do incorporate with great power comes great responsibility in this. And wazoo, it still seems like it has emotional weight because it's Marissa Tomei. It's almost the same feeling that I had when I saw Sally Field, and I was like, am I seeing Sally Field or am I seeing Aunt May? And when it comes to Marissa Tomei, I saw Aunt May in Homecoming. I did not see Aunt May in the subsequent two films. I saw Marissa Tomei both times.
Okay.
Like, it's just it's another diminishing return, and maybe it's the phases, maybe it's that Far From Home was a bit of a Tony Stark wake, and this is a let's bring it all home so that MCU and Sony can have their pie and eat it too. It just, I don't know, there's something that rings hollow about it that and this is upon a second full viewing, and I was just like, yeah, no, I see the gloss, I see the product, but it just the emotion of it does rely upon my appreciation for something that came before.
Okay.
So yeah.
I still think it's a really good movie on its own right, because I was invested in that character arc. Whereas the member berry stuff I feel wasn't as strong as it could have been.
How did you feel about the inclusion of Rice Iphans?
So him and
Thomas Hayden Church.
Yeah, both of them. I was kind of trying to figure out what that was about, because they recorded dialogue before the movie, but was it scheduling conflicts, or they just didn't want to come back? Because I imagine it would be a lot more expensive to present like Sandman just in CGI the entire time than like he is in Spider-Man 3, where he's just, you know, a regular guy until he transforms into sand, or like the Lizard, who, depending on at what point in time he was teleported into this universe, for a while you could restrain the Lizard aspect of it, almost like he was morphing back and forth, and you could have potentially had just Rhys Ifans as himself there with a little bit of the scaly green makeup without having to go full Lizard all the time. Because it just seems a lot more expensive to do. And I still think that that's the only reason, the only story reason why the Lizard decides to stay in the truck when they go to Happy's apartments, because they don't want to spend all the extra unnecessary money digitally animating that, because it just costs a lot of too much money. So I don't know what the impetus was for, like, if you can't get them to come back, it's like, that's why I felt those two characters were more member berries than anything, because the actors weren't really there, and I don't know who the stand-ins were, but it was a bit there. And I did think it also breaks the immersion when Lizard points out the fact that Electro is not, you know, Max Dillon is not remotely consistent with the version of himself from Amazing Spider-Man 2. Like, if he was, whatever social problems he had, if he was on the spectrum or whatever it is, he's just a regular guy now. Like, he's like, hey, Max, last time I saw you, you had glasses and a comb over. And Max kind of reacts like, oh, okay, yeah, like you're making a dig at him. And they don't really address why he's different. They just did it because they knew that fans didn't like that portrayal. So let's just change it, even if it doesn't really make sense for the rules of the universe. Like, why is he different? It's like, okay. So that was, and yeah, I prefer Jamie Foxx's version of Electro in this movie a lot better, of course. But even he doesn't really have an art. Like, I didn't believe, they made him so normal, like away from the Max Dillon of Amazing Spider-Man 2, that at the end of the movie, when he finally gets all the electricity or whatever out of him, and he says, oh, I'm back to being a nobody. It's like, well, I didn't believe anymore that he would care about that, because he seemed almost too normal. You know, like when he's not the socially awkward guy who obsesses over Spider-Man anymore. He's just like regular, you know, Jamie Foxx. And therefore I didn't believe that he cared about, oh, I'm back to being a nobody. And he's like, you were never a nobody, man. It's like, that just felt weird and out of place, especially when he's like, oh, I was hoping you'd be black and there's a black spider. It's like, why? It's like, I don't know. So those three characters I didn't feel. It's like, yes, Electro was more comics accurate and was kind of fun to see that. And Jamie Foxx is better in it, but it's not remotely consistent from what was in the previous film. And then Lizard and Sandman, again, they don't resolve any of their storylines. It's just kind of awkward that they're only portrayed digitally. It's because I never did get the story as to why. So, like, why they didn't come back, or if it was a scheduling conflict or what. I don't know.
Well, and an interesting thing about all the villains is it's discovered that a lot of them die after their interactions with Spider-Man. And that's why Peter's trying to protect them from going back to their own universes so that they don't die. But even Dr. Connors says, Max, do you know, did I die? And at the end of Amazing Spider-Man, no, he didn't. Flint Marko, did he die? No, he didn't. So out of the five people,
Who's
two of them did not die.
Who's the fifth?
Because you also have.
Oh, right.
Electro. Electro died? Did Electro die?
Yeah, because he kind of, after he got blown up over the power grid, he like exploded or disintegrated or whatever. So
I thought he just became
pure energy. Die. And I think Peter's decision to intervene in that is also more so the idea that him standing by and doing nothing makes him in a way complicit with even though Doctor Strange is objectively correct that the damage that would be done to the multiverse is multitudes worse than what happens to these five guys. Peter is good enough that he doesn't want to, he kind of wants to do something about it. He doesn't want to be complicit in their deaths, even though this is another problem the movie has, which is the fact that Doctor Strange brings us to the attention that, or brings to the forefront the idea that all people from unlimited amount of universes and dimensions who know Peter Parker's Spider-Man are coming here, but because the plot demanded it, they only have it be these five characters at this particular time. Because by extension, it's not just villains. Other people who know the Peter Parker Spider-Man, like maybe MJ, the Kirsten Dunst one, could come into this universe. Maybe Gwen Stacy, before she dies in Amazing Spider-Man, could come into this universe. Yeah, there's all sorts of ways you can go with this and how that goes. that makes it a very much the plot demanded it type movie to make the story work. But real quick on those characters, I do think that Doc Ock and Green Goblin have good payoffs, because Doc Ock, you bring it back around to when he has, you know, the power of the sun in the palm of my hand, because he was a very altruistic, he wanted to save everybody, and he finally gets to this universe and he sees it and he's holding it, and part of me wishes he had scrutinized Tony's technology when they were in Hogan's apartment a lot more, in hopes that now that he's apparently cured, maybe he can go back and utilize that, even though it really doesn't make sense for him, because it's like, well, he died after, I guess he accrued the mental willpower to override the tentacles to do what he wanted to do, which was destroying his own machine. So in a way, he's not, it's like, yes, you cured the technological part, so he doesn't have to use the mental willpower to do it, but it doesn't change the fact that he's still going to die when he goes back to that universe, because he still has to destroy the machine to prevent it from, you know, absconding New York. And given his attitude when he first got transported to the bridge, it seems like Spider-Man hadn't yet shown up to the dock. Like, it happened, like, I guess, right before that. So really the outcome would still be the same. I would, or maybe he's not going to engage Spider-Man immediately. They team. It's like it, because again, it's a very, the plot demanded it type thing to make the member-berry aspect of the story work. But I did like that moment that Doc Ock doesn't stay a villain in this movie, that he does have that little payoff there. And then you get, of course, Green Goblin, who's I thought was a much better version of the character than what was in the original, because it's not, you know, the Power Rangers plastic thing. You get to see Willem Dafoe really being vicious and living up to that role, which is like what you want to see. Looks a bit more comics accurate. I like that he kills Aunt May, because that adds a bit more depth of villain to his character. And yeah, you have the fake out where he stabs the other Peter, and where it seems like
it just felt like last minute stakes for no reason.
Yeah, and then I admit that he had that great bit where he looks up at Peter after he's been cured. He's like, Peter, and he's like, what have I done? But there's no real resolution to that. So where's he going to go? He's going to get, I guess, teleported back to his timeline where he's either on Brooklyn Bridge or in the ruins of that building on the shoreline and just be, I guess, normal again. It's just a very weird thing in terms of the plot demanded it being words that have to be uttered repeatedly to make the story work, or to make the aspect of the story work.
The multiverse doesn't make any sense. The plot is emotionally manipulative. The story is there. I think the story is there. You're right. But if you think about the plot of the movie and how everything connects from A to B to C to D, I think that it does not bear scrutiny.
Well, yeah, kind of like even in the most simplest sense, where Flash Thompson finds out that Peter's Spider-Man, and like a couple days later, he's already got this book that he's selling that he's published, where he's written this whole bullshit account about being Spider-Man's best friend. And they make, of course, the Flashpoint joke with, you know, because that's basically what the movie is, the DC riff on DC's Flashpoint. And it's like, well, wait a minute. If MJ and Ned got barred from going into college because they're friends with Spider-Man and the other colleges don't want all that bullshit, then why does Flash get in? Is that because nobody believed the bullshit he wrote in the book, which they'd have no reason not to believe it because nobody knows who he is? So he's allowed into MIT, but the others aren't. It's like, that doesn't make any sense either. It's just, nope. The plot mechanics don't work, because you're right. It is an emotionally manipulative story that's trying to figure out how do we, like, it's like Sony's, like their Hail Mary pass to try and get $1 gajillion out of this by giving the fans what they think they want to see, which apparently they did want to see because of the money it made. But it requires, and I admit it's an entertaining story and it's fun movie to watch, rather than say some random Spider-Man villain, you know, forcing it through the same type of means. I still thought briefly that Mysterio might have come back, because I wasn't convinced that he actually died on the bridge, because it's like, well, if you have a character who manipulates reality, and the last thing he says to Peter before he dies is people will believe anything, then by extension, he's referring to, it's like you're tricking him right there. You know, it's like, you know, I kind of assumed that would have been an opportunity to bring that back, but they didn't.
No. Very disjointed from the other two films as well.
In terms of the plot mechanics, or what?
Well, both No Way Home, or sorry, Homecoming and Far From Home were Tony Stark centric, sort of impetus for villain, impetus for plot. They felt cohesive from sort of even tonally. And then when you get to this one, it just feels, as I keep saying, a yearbook. It just looks like a looking back on all the things that the fans liked about Spider Man. Let's bring them all in. Not the MCU, but Spider Man. And
Yeah, because they
this
really,
isn't member berries. I don't think this is member berries. I think this is tonally manipulative. And it works. It succeeds. When I say it as being manipulative, I don't mean that as a negative. I think that it did adequately, properly. It pulled all of the strings that you needed to make me feel for a Spider-Man story.
well, isn't that still kind of member berries? Where you're, because again, the fact that they threw in all these characters and callbacks without caring about the plot mechanics at all. Like for instance, even in the beginning of the movie, they focus a bit on Peter's friends and other people from Midtown High, and then they all kind of get jettisoned from the story in the first 20 minutes, so they could focus just on Peter, Ned, and MJ. And for that matter, I feel the Peter and MJ relationship a lot more in this movie than in the second one, where he's trying to like her kind of thing, and they jettisoned MJ's whole macabre side of her personality. They got rid of that. I do like the running joke with Ned, how they keep teasing that he could potentially be a sorcerer or have something going on there, and even Doctor Strange at the end of the movie kind of acknowledges that, you got the sling ring to work, and the references to Hobgoblin, the subtle references to that people were making with the Ned's jacket and all, and how he's like, I promise I won't turn into a supervillain and try and kill you. So I thought the relationship between Peter, MJ, and Ned worked really well. That was another really great scene when they say goodbye. And the movie at the end has a much better use of Emperor Palpatine than The Rise of Skywalker did at all, with just that one little Lego piece. And it works so much better for nostalgia on so many more levels than that, and something about the apartment that Peter goes into immediately reminded me of just the same look of the one that Toby's character had for some reason.
In
And it feels
Spider-Man 2, for sure.
it feels very much like they brought it around full circle, that he's back to Sony classic Spider-Man. And I liked that story because it is a sad ending, really. Like, they didn't go for some cheesy MCU happy like, yeah, you saved the multiverse from collapsing in on itself and destroying the universe, but it's not. It feels more like almost like what you'd call a Pyrrhic victory because of everything he had to lose to achieve it. And then again, the plot mechanics not working with the way they treated the villains, as I explained, and that it's again totally emotionally manipulative. Or especially the idea that they could just whip up the cures for these things inside the Midtown High science class. It's like, really, you're not even gonna get, like, remember it was rumored at the end of Far From Home that when you had that final montage of Peter swinging through or Spider-Man swinging through the city, and he kind of does this weird, does like the flight suit mode, and he passes through the old Avengers Tower, which had all the plants and everything on it, but they don't show you what it is now. And people thought, ooh, I wonder if that's going to be Oscorp. And to date, they haven't said what Avengers Tower is now. They still haven't said that. So I thought that, well, maybe that's an opportunity to set that up or something. Because the idea that, like, when Garfield says, oh, yeah, I've cured Connors before. It's no problem. I got it here. Or Toby, for no apparent reason, because Norman's dead and Harry's dead, and presumably all the goblin shit is over with. He's like, oh, yeah, I've been tinkering with this for a couple of years, and here's this magic cure. The amount of liberties they're taking with basic logic or even internal story logic is egregious in this film, probably more than any other Marvel movie. And I'm including the Fox Marvel films in that resounding thing as well. But because of the emotional manipulation, it works, and it's just, which is surprising. I usually wouldn't think. I'd usually be bogged down and distracted by all the inconsistencies to not be able to enjoy it. But I was able. It worked, so I was able to enjoy it, which was surprising.
And I let myself be washed over by the emotion, and the familiar faces. It feels like a transition to me. I've said it already. I'm going to say it again. It's I felt emotionally manipulated. I enjoyed the emotional manipulation, but if I look back on it or if I watch it again, which I did, I'm like, no, I see what you're doing. I see the magic trick. And I think that's part of how I feel about the MCU in general, uh, is that at this point, looking back at past victories seems to be their game. There are outliers. There are sort of one-off disposable MCU things that I enjoy now, but they're disposable single issues, and that's what this is. This was almost like a supersized issue. Thanks for the reunion, but it didn't tie into the MCU. I thought it was cursory and just by virtue of needing to be there. And then when it came to the Spider-Man stuff, I thought that they were taking advantage of my goodwill, and they took advantage of it well. But all in all, like, I don't know. It's better than Spider-Man 3.
I also like that the way they portrayed Aunt May in this one more than the last one, because the idea in the second one that she's actively encouraging him to go out and be Spider-Man and all that was really weird. And as I mentioned before, the fact that the DS agent says, you didn't know, as his guardian, were aware of it, but you actually encouraged it. And they're writing it to make him seem like a douche, but it's like, he's right. But in the third movie, this one, I felt they kind of scaled that back a lot, and you see how she's being a lot more charitable, and she's not asking him to be Spider-Man. She's just asking him to help people as, Peter Parker. Like when when Norman shows up at the whatever
Feast.
at the feast, and Peter just kind of is initially really moved when he sees how distressed Norman is, and he acknowledges that they all have their own psychological issues or whatnot, but he just wants to send them home, which, yes, he's right that Doctor Strange insisted that would be the solution that would be best fitting to the universe, but she's the one who kind of gets in his head, which is something that Goblin accuses him of later. Oh, she got in your head with her moral mission. And yes, that moral mission ends up costing him, and that's specifically why Goblin chooses to kill Aunt May instead of throwing the bomb directly at Peter or at his feet. Because he seems to think, almost in like a Joker-Batman type relationship, that it'd be fun to get rid of Aunt May so you and I could have more fights and have more encounters and a weird, that weird type of symmetrical relationship. And so I do like that way that they portrayed Aunt May in this, and that even as she's dying, she still thinks they made the right decision. Or at least what's the morally right decision, even though it's when it's a numbers game, the Doctor Strange clearly would win out on that.
Well, and even like, I love Willem Dafoe as the Green Goblin. I always have. It's always a joy to see him. And when he fights Tom Holland's Spider-Man, it didn't have the same connection to me as it did when he fought Tobey Maguire, but it had more sort of character resonance with Spider-Man, where the Green Goblin was saying, you have the strength to have whatever you want, and you're afraid, and you give it all away. And it's much more of a defining factor for the Green Goblin, Norman Osborn, in terms of his duality. He's not fighting Spider-Man. He's fighting Peter Parker, who has the power to do whatever he wants, and yet he's still, what do I do? How do I get into college? And Norman is like, we could be gods. We're not so different, you and I. And that, I think that that's an interesting battle, but I don't think that that battle that I see between Willem Dafoe and Tom Holland, I don't think that that's a battle between those two. I think it's between Willem Dafoe and Tobey Maguire. I would love to see that. And well, I guess I did.
Even when he shows up on he's interested, he keeps addressing him as Peter, but you could tell he's not the least bit bothered by the fact that this isn't his Peter. It's still that, right, you're Spider-Man, I'm Goblin, I'm crazy, I want to fight you type of thing. And for that matter, in terms of the universe's Peter or Goblin or whatnot, the J. Jonah Jameson character, they do reinvent him a bit, where he's like a basement broadcaster type guy, total conspiracy theorist, and tinfoil, introduced initially on the news as if he's a tinfoil hat type guy, like controversial news website, the Daily Bugle. And it's kind of a running joke. And I like the jokes that they don't draw your attention to with explicit dialogue. But the fact that when you first see him in this movie, he's inside his house with just like a webcam or whatever. Then later on, you see him like outside in a van with a crew, and then you see him eventually in a full studio, but they're not drawing attention to just how wildly popular he's becoming. And while he is the angry J. Jonah Jameson type, I was surprised at two things. One, that his following them back to the apartment doesn't end up amounting to anything, because it seemed like they were setting up that Jameson was the one who's going to be the reason everything goes wrong. Because he's following him to Hogan's apartment. It's like, is he going to bring the cops? Is he going to try and do some scoop that's going to set everything off? And instead, he just kind of meanders outside and freaks out when he sees, the lizard come out. And he's like, "Did you see that?" The next thing I was surprised by is that when he gives the big speech on the Jumbotron about, everywhere Spider-Man goes, calamity follows. And it's like, yeah, the logic on the one hand in my brain is telling me that he's a jerk. But on the other hand, the way he's delivering the lines, I felt like he actually believes what he's saying at that point, and that he's genuinely sad that this is what's become of it. Like, it wasn't just him trying to drum up ratings. It seemed like he genuinely believed that this is how horrible it is. And then, of course, they bring it back to regular arrogant Jonah for the climax. And again, it's the whole fake news type commentary that everybody just believes Mysterio, even though, of course, you have the very random cameo from Daredevil who says that none of the charges are going to stick. And logically, that makes sense, because there's got to be records of who Quentin Beck is somewhere. And obviously, it would be easy to prove that it was all fake from because they never did address what happened to all of his co-conspirators. They just kind of disappeared. But Daredevil says it's not going to stick. I believe him that the charges aren't going to stick. They do have in the extended cut, which I've seen, that Hogan ends up retaining Daredevil as his lawyer as well, to deal with the fact that you had all of this weapons high-grade technology, and it didn't file any type of motions to keep it out of the hands of a kid and stuff like that, which is, again, continuing the absurdity from the previous film that Peter would even have been left all this stuff. And so that was another, like the fact that so many people are believing in Mysterio, to me, seems to just be the filmmakers trying to make a commentary on fake news, as opposed to like what would probably actually have happened. I don't know. It kind of, because that was another thing in the second movie where the plot mechanics don't work, because there's no way that even hologram drones or projectors are going to be able to convince people that there's a giant water canal or molten man and all that kind of stuff, right? It's just, again, the plot mechanic, it's requiring you to suspend your disbelief and go further into comic booky territory to buy into the logic. And plus the fact that Matt Murdock, the fact that Matt Murdock says, "Oh, I could get the charges dropped like that," it's like, well, that was the primary issue facing him, is that he's got, all these problems with, one, the Mysterio allegations, and secondly, when he says that all the charges should be dropped, I'm assuming that the Sokovia Accords are irrelevant after the events of Infinity War and Endgame, given how nobody ratified the Avengers' actions to undo what Thanos did, and it's not like they're going to bitch about the fact that they did that. So I don't think there would be any criminal charges against him for being Spider-Man. Maybe not. I mean, it's just, again, it's unclear. It's just because of that whole emotional manipulation thing. It's like, we don't really know.
It's a lovely picture book.
Yeah.
As a movie, I don't think it holds together.
Yeah, certainly not when it comes to the plot mechanics of it. But in terms of the story, it worked.
I found a lot of it dark.
Yeah, it's true. It is pretty dark at times and tragic.
Yeah, and I don't mean tonally. I mean in terms of the special effects, to make sure that the CGI didn't look bad.
Yeah, because Alfred Molina said that they were going to, like, his first objection to coming back was that, "Oh, I'm too old to play that part now." And that Kevin told him that they could use de-aging technology or whatever to clean that up. But if they did, I thought they did a good job on it, because it didn't look to me like they did a CG touch-up on him.
No. And I watched the special features on the DVD, or Blu-ray, pardon me. And although they were standard definition, and Alfred Molina still looked great. Everyone looked good. And by everyone, I mean Jamie Foxx, Alfred Molina, and Willem Dafoe. I think they all, if they needed touching up, what a waste of money.
Yeah. And then there is a subplot that they touch bases on very lightly, and the notion that people are there's a very divisive reaction to the Statue of Liberty being given the Captain America shield, and how people feel about that, and the fact that Jameson's like, Spider-Man loves destroying national landmarks, and yet he ends up destroying the Captain America shield in the process, which on the one hand seems appropriate, because why are you putting that on the Statue of Liberty? Because it doesn't, like, if you want to build a statue to Captain America, great, do that. Don't tamper with that. And I thought they could have probed that idea more for, philosophical, like what that actually, symbolic, like what that actually means. And
then they have like an MCU thing. It just felt like a hood ornament.
Another plot demanded at moment is that when the two Peters show up, Ned opens the sling ring and it closes by itself when they come through. But then in the finale, Ned can't close the sling ring because the plot demanded it. And so,
you okay with Ned just having magic now?
Well, I don't really know exactly how. I'm not familiar with the comics in terms of how the sling ring works. Like, is it the prop that does it, or is it you as the person? Because I think they're trying to imply that he has some type of heritage or something that makes him. I'm not again. I'm not up to speed on the lore of how that works. Like, if but if that's what they're teasing, I don't know, maybe. Because at first, when he tells Doctor Strange that when I hold this up, I have to tingle it in my fingers, he's like, "You should talk to a doctor." And then at the end of the movie, when he says, "You got that to work?" and he's like, "Yes, sir," and he's like, "Huh," and it just kind of, walks away. So
it looked like an open door.
Yeah. They're opening that to as if that might go somewhere. Meanwhile, I did like the bit when the three of them are in the high school lab, and you have Peter and MJ are like bonding, and then Garfield's kind of watching them and kind of seems almost sad about it, and then Toby picks up on it and he's like, "Oh, you got somebody." He kind of just tries to shake it off, but he's like, but you could tell it bothers him that he doesn't have somebody anymore. Whereas Toby's just like, "Well, I have MJ, but we kind of make it work, whatever that means."
It means we all know I punched her.
That's right. Oh God, that was another thing.
But that is why he says it's complicated and we made it work, and so it's nice that they got back together. But there is an acknowledgement of it's not all wine and roses.
Yeah, but I was wondering if that was more due to the fact that just regular relationship stuff, or because he's trying to still balance being Spider-Man with being whatever his profession is now that he's an adult.
I don't think it's that deep. I think it's more of an acknowledgement of the audience knowing what happened. One thing I keep hearing about this movie is that it is sort of a conclusion to those Spider-Mans. It is a conclusion to those villains, as if they were dangling just threads that needed to be tied up.
Right.
And so when anything is addressed with the other Spider-Mans, it feels like they are directly acknowledging, yeah, we know Toby's Peter slapped MJ. We know that Andrew's Gwen died, and we're gonna reference as much of this as possible. And obviously, I'm not saying anything new because they even have the villains from those two. It would be interesting if they brought back, I don't know, like even if they brought back Mysterio, or if they brought back the Vulture,
or Harry. Both the Harrys, even,
Ooh, dual Harrys.
Because again, I feel that bringing back Lizard and Sandman was point, and especially when I hear people say that, oh, it's the conclusion to those things that are dangling as if they weren't resolved. The only one that was truly unresolved was Sandman, and they didn't resolve that story. And then Lizard's
none of the villains. At the end of this movie, all of the villains just go away, and even Norman, even the Green Goblin, doesn't.
Right, and the Goblin thing would help if you knew precisely the moment he was returning to. Like, if he is returned to a moment before the climax of the first movie, he can go to Peter because he knows he's Spider-Man now, and tell him everything, and that he's cured all that and whatever, and he'll be fine. But if it's in the if he's literally getting teleported away right when the glider was about to hit him, then sorry, he's going to die anyway. Same thing with Doc Ock. If he got teleported before Spider-Man showed up at the Doc house, he's going to come back and, having been cured, he's going to turn to Spider-Man. He's going to release MJ, turn to Spider-Man the moment he arrives and says, "Help me destroy this thing," but he's still going to have to do it on his own and still going to die. Whereas Lizard, admittedly, he's still in jail, and it seemed like he got treatments or something because he wasn't in the lizard form. Like, oh, that's right, because he gave him the treatment, but I wasn't sure if that was a permanent cure at the end of Amazing Spider-Man 1 or not, because when he shows up in this movie, he's back to lizard form, suggesting that he's taken some time during the climax. So if you send him back, okay, he's cured, but the whole city is still trying to kill him and stop him because they think he's going to, infect the whole world. So it really doesn't resolve anything. And same thing with Electro. He's going to go back to where he was, and because he was, at the time that he had died, he was hovering above that power. He's just going to fall down to his death. It's like there's no the only person who's apparently going to be all right is Sandman, unless he got teleported while he was flying through the sky, in which case he's going to fall to his death. So that's like a fundamental flaw in the film's logic, that we're going to save these people and cure them. And it's like, well,
no,
you're not really. Because, again, another problem with Max Dillon is that even if he does live, like if Spider-Man, if the Garfield Spider-Man back in that universe sees that he suddenly goes from being the Blue Electro to just a regular guy and saves him, he's going to go back to being that weird Max Dillon who still has all those same social problems and can't figure out. It's like he can't go back to his job at Oscorp at that point because he most certainly would have been fired and done with. So what's he going to do? So it's not really resolving anything. It's basically there to show that Peter is moral enough that he doesn't, when faced with something right directly in his face, yet he is not going to just sacrifice everybody to die. Because again, we have to remember that we have the benefit of seeing those other movies and knowing that it's really not going to do anything. The Holland Peter doesn't know that, though, because he just assumes that, oh, we'll cure them and they'll just go back to being regular people. But if he were told, well, this is actually what's going to happen when they go back, they're going to die anyway, then maybe he wouldn't have stopped Doctor Strange. Maybe he would have protested more, but not actually, gone so far as to actually seize it. Because that's the thing I always have to remember when I'm watching this movie again, is that he doesn't know the scenarios that these people were in at the time. He doesn't know that they're going to die anyway, and that curing them is completely irrelevant, or not die anyway, or in Lizard's case, he's still going to go to jail for probably for life, and so he doesn't have the benefit of knowing that. So that's a little bit of an out. It's just that for the audience, it doesn't really work, because as audience members, we know that this isn't going to achieve anything. It's not going to achieve a different result.
I wish I had more to say about this movie.
That's true, because we did for those who don't know watching, we did a spoiler recap on December 19th, 2021 with friend of the channel, Todd Michael.
True.
You could check that out. We also have that. Do we have any comments so far?
Yeah, Lemon Pie and Jill were here, but no, there hasn't been much going on in the comments. But thanks to everyone who's watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, share with your friends, leave a comment after the fact. But I would like to. I didn't have a chance to go back and check out those initial feelings. I think that I was gushing about my initial viewing of Spider-Man No Way Home. And I think a lot of it had to do with me saying, I can't wait until I revisit the Tobey Maguire and the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man movies to give this more weight. I don't know if I said that.
You did.
But I remember feeling that way. And now that I've seen it, Spider-Man No Way Home, after having watched the Raimi trilogy and the web duology, I feel like I'm glad that I watched those other movies, because this was just an advertisement, a yearbook, a pamphlet for the memories of those films. And when it comes to this one, it's half Spider-Man movie, half MCU movie, and things. I think the member berries in this are the Captain America shield on the Statue of Liberty. I think this is like at the end of this, the post-credit sequence to this is the trailer to Multiverse of Madness.
Right, because they didn't feel the need to shoehorn anything else in because they're putting a dot on it other than the ridiculous mid-credit scene in which Eddie Brock is at that resort or whatever in Mexico, and he's been told about the events of Infinity War and Endgame, and he's having a hard time processing it, understandably. And once he gets teleported back to his timeline, for no logical reason whatsoever, a piece of the symbiote breaks off and stays behind. And I guess that's going to be their explanation. That Sony's cheap way of bringing Venom back into Spider-Man without having to do a whole big Venom origin story. Like, here's the parasite, it's coming. And who knows why in the mid-credit scene of Venom 2 Let There Be Carnage, why Venom was so enamored by seeing Spider-Man unmasked on the television. It's like, okay, it's a kid in a suit. What do you care, you know? But he was like really excited about it and was licking him on the TV screen, which is like, okay, this is really weird. But again, it's one of those plot demanded it moments. Does it make sense that a piece of the symbiote is going back? No, because if everybody that knew Peter Parker was Spider-Man is going back, that would include that piece of the symbiote which has been left behind, because presumably that's going to make its way across the country to New York, or across the world to New York to infect Spider-Man, and so it's like that's another breaking of the immersion for, again, the plot demanded it seems to be a perfect subtitle for this film.
But I feel like it's also the universe demands it. The universe expands it. Like the whole licking thing from Venom was to try and expand Venom into Spider-Man. The tenuous grasp that Sony has on Spider-Man. Yeah. I don't know. Do you think they're going to reboot? Do you think they're going to get another Spider-Man, or do you think they're going to get
I still think we're going to get another Holland trilogy, because he still is young enough to look the part. They've basically rebooted the character at the end of this movie anyway, because as we explained last week, there's no reason for him to go back to interact with the MCU people, because he doesn't want to. He already made it clear that he's not going to go back to Ned and MJ. And even though MJ says, "Oh, if you, I'll figure it out, even if you don't tell me," it's like, well, she's not going to have any impetus to try and figure it out, because the reason she wanted to figure it out the first time is because she was pining for Peter from the beginning, but she's not anymore. She has no idea who he is. So the what they have to work with also is the fact that Peter's not going to bother.
Get a white redhead.
What?
MJ. We'll get a Mary Jane, a white redhead.
I don't think so. I don't think he obviously isn't going to go back to Doctor Strange for help anymore because of all that crap that happened. So they do have a couple things in their back pocket. One is Vulture and Scorpion, and this is what I mean. Matt Gargan never knew that Peter Parker was Spider-Man. So the thing at the end, the spell doesn't mean anything to him. He's still angry at Spider-Man and wants revenge. So there's a villain waiting in the wings. Next, the fact that Vulture no longer knows who Spider-Man is means that he has no reason to be forgiving of him, because as I mentioned when we reviewed Homecoming, he doesn't give up Peter's identity because Peter saved his daughter, and he knows that Peter's just a kid and Peter saved him. But now that he doesn't know who Spider-Man is anymore, and sure, Spider-Man saved his daughter, but he doesn't really have as much impetus to protect him, especially now years on that he's been in prison all this time and without his family and all that kind of stuff. So that could be somebody they could bring back if they wanted to. I don't think they will, because I don't think Michael Keaton would want to come back to do that. But that's a possibility, because again, as I discussed, I think the whole post-credit scene for Morbius is dead and done, given how atrociously received that film was. I don't think they're going to do a sequel. I don't think Jared Leto's wishful thinking that he's going to have a crossover with Tom Holland is going to happen. That's just no. Like the fact that they re-released that movie because of a meme and then it just tanked even harder. No, I think that's totally over with. But so they have Scorpion waiting in the wings, potentially Vulture, definitely Venom, because they're for some reason obsessed with doing. I guess they want to do that Venom again. I mean, I don't know. It's like you already got a Venom franchise with Tom Hardy, and if you're not going to let the Tom Hardy Venom stay there, and you already did Venom with Topher Grace, admittedly in Spider-Man 3, it's like, there are other characters in the Spider-Man mythos you could bring in here if you want to. And now that it's rebooted, you're right. Because there's no reason to do MCU tie-ins, they could just reboot with a brand new actor and sever their tie with Marvel entirely. But I think they know that the Holland Spider-Man is popular enough, especially coming off No Way Home, that they have every incentive to renew that deal. Especially if Holland is still willing to play the role, why not? So I think that we'll probably get, if not a trilogy, maybe a fourth one, or a fifth. Why not plan a trilogy? I mean, if he's game for it, and now that you've basically rebooted the character and he's back to being just regular Spider-Man from the comics, you could tell a whole new story. Yeah, you could tell a whole new story, meaning in that could work. So, but I do think all the emotional beats in this movie work very well, especially the ones with Holland's character. I liked it. And one of my favorite scenes, of course, is when he is at the grave with Hogan. I thought that was really sad, especially when Hogan, even when he drives up and he sees the destruction in his apartment, and he just knows intrinsically what has happened, that May's already gone, and that was great. And I felt that this movie hit all the emotional beats a lot harder than the other Spider-Man films did in their respective attempts at emotional beats. Like, I didn't feel anything when Harry died in Spider-Man 3. Didn't feel anything when Gwen died. It's like, mostly because the rest of that movie, even though her relationship with him was the best aspect of the Garfield movies, it still felt like something that was so telegraphed and we expected it that it didn't really do much for me. Whereas the fact that they turned Aunt May into like Uncle Ben with great power, that came out of left field. I didn't think they were going to do that in a third movie, or technically the sixth from his appearance. I'm like, wow, that was something. So, and then just the scene also when he's standing there in the rain, like as is hinted on this cover here, looking at Jameson saying, anywhere he goes, calamity and death follows. And that whole thing was handled well. The initial union of the Spider-Men was handled very well, and the dialogue they have with each other. So I think it's one of those movies that defies logic, where we can break all of the immersion and violate every rule of plot mechanics and internal story logic that we can possibly violate, but still emotionally manipulate you enough to enjoy it and like it. Much like Spielberg originally did in The Fabelmans, where it's like, oh, you're going to make your own life story, basically, and you're going to naturally assume going into such thing, oh, it's going to be whitewashed, it's going to be grandiose, blah, blah, and then somehow he never makes you forget that you're watching his basic origin story and that he directed it, but he manipulates you emotionally enough that you just go with it, and it makes it a great movie. And I feel that's the same thing that No Way Home achieves.
I feel like when I'm watching the Spider-Man No Way Home, I feel like I'm watching a movie magazine that I would get in a bookstore that is talking about 25 years of Spider-Man movies. I'm reminded of all the things that I liked, and I'm intrigued how they incorporated it all together, but I do feel like it's Lethal Weapon 4. I feel like this is a TV reunion special that works to make me feel feelings. But if I look closer at the story and the plot of it, I realize that all of the mechanics are there just to make it a hallway lobby card, or sorry, a magazine. It's something that I pick up in the theater and then leave on the seat beside me afterwards. There's no resonance. I don't feel anything except for, oh yeah, I should check out those other Spider-Man movies that I liked. Oh yeah, I liked Tom Holland in Civil War and Homecoming. But this is just such a hodgepodge of a tossed salad of Spider-Man stuff that even when they're being clever, I can see behind the curtain, and it doesn't do a heck of a lot for me, just because I can see. I know what they're doing. The magic trick doesn't work on me this time, and it's unfortunate. I'm really happy with the first time that I saw Toby do the wall crawling, and the emotional weight of Gwen Stacy dying with Andrew Garfield. Those were Spider-Man adaptation moments where I felt the comic and I felt the character. And this is something where it's like, remember all those things that you saw in movies before? we're going to do them all now and you're going to feel feelings. And it's like, I did feel feelings. Thank you. You didn't have to tell me you were going to do it, but they did. And I don't know, something about it rings hollow. It's a chameleon, if you will.
I did like the interaction amongst the three of them, though.
Yes.
That chemistry was there, how they're swapping stories and all that kind of stuff. I'm like, okay, that's kind of funny. And how they're both, both Andrew and Tom are like fascinated that Toby can just shoot his own webs. It's like,
But
and how they.
That's such a weird fourth wall break.
Well, it sort of, because it's already been established that Holland and Maguire and Garfield can't shoot their own webs, and I thought that was a funny bit because naturally they're fascinated. It's like, why can you do that exactly? And you're right, it is a fourth wall break because it's sort of responding to the fan criticism of why did Toby have the magic ability to shoot his own webs instead of making the web shooters like in the comics. But I thought that still was kind of funny. And then when they bring it up again when they're at the Statue of Liberty, and then the weird fourth wall break was the thing about his back hurting or being busted, and Garfield cracks his back for him, because I actually was unaware of that whole thing when the movies originally came out. I didn't know that. I didn't know that Toby got injured and then he almost got replaced by Jake Gyllenhaal. I didn't know any of that. Other people had to fill me in on that because I'm like, okay, he's helping him crack his back of injury. I thought, oh, okay, Spider-Man helping each other out because they get injured. And then when somebody told me afterwards the whole story, I was like, oh, like that is kind of weird.
Yeah. There's too many winks at the audience, too many things you're expected to know. And if you don't know them, they come off as whimsical, but I don't know. I just can't.
It's sort of like how, because the plot demanded it, all the villains flee the apartment, but where exactly did they go and why? It's like, why did Goblin not show up until the end of the battle, pretty much? Like, where did Doc Ock go when he took off? Like, where's Lizard? Like, why have we not heard any reports from Jameson about the alleged terror that these monsters are inflicting upon the rest of society? Like, where exactly did they go? We don't know. They're just gone.
Idea. Yep.
Yeah, it's like, again, totally emotionally manipulative on every level. It defies logic that the movie works as well as it does.
$1.9 billion worth of emotional manipulation.
And I don't know if it's also, and I don't know if that's also a combination of people just wanting to go back to the movies, or their belief that this was going to be better than what Marvel had been offering in Phase 4 up to that point, or just the fact it was pure nostalgia, because it was actually Alfred Molina who spoiled the fact that he was going to be in the movie. Up until then, any theory about bringing characters back was just a rumor. It wasn't confirmed. It was just theory. And when he did that, I was wondering how different would the marketing have been if he had not accidentally let slip that he was in the movie. Because once he let that slip, they put it in the trailer. Because I'm just trying to think about how amazing would it have been in terms of rose-colored glasses and just going along for the emotional ride if I didn't know that was coming when I watched the movie and all of a sudden Doc Ock shows up. I'm like, that would have been amazing.
And I don't think that is a possibility. I don't think that he let it slip.
He did say he got a call from Marvel about that.
I think, fine. He went, oopsie. But considering that the entire marketing department was built around it, and there is no other primary antagonist that is original.
Right.
I think that it was manufactured. I think the entire process was a product. And of course it was. Stop being naive, Scott. But
well, in a way, I felt that the antagonist was more or less an existential one. That, again, he needs to make this decision, and that's what's really causing these problems. Because, again, it goes back to Doctor Strange. Mysterio is not the problem. You are. And your insistence in not making this decision and making up your mind about what you want to do is now bringing back not ghosts from your past, but ghosts from the other Spider-Man's past and causing you problems. And in a way, I didn't feel like the film was, because really these so-called, these villains aren't really antagonists. Like, they're there, and Peter takes it upon himself to make it a problem by saying, I'm going to cure them, but it's not like any of them have any master plan to do anything. They're just kind of there, which is why I felt the antagonist was Peter constantly coming up with an excuse to kick the can down the road to not make up his mind on what he was going to do until he finally made that decision.
Perhaps. if it connected more intellectually,
Yeah.
then kudos. It just didn't get there with me.
Yeah, that's fair.
So yeah, I'm done.
Okay, what? Oh, we have to give them like webs, or how many like webs do we give it, or web shooters, or whatever we give them, or how many
6.
spiders?
6.
6. I mean, it is very emotionally manipulative, and it works a lot, and I really love it. So I'm gonna give it like an 8.5.
Makes sense.
But that's again purely on the emotional manipulation. Because I've rewatched the film enough times that it still works on that same level each time.
And I don't know. I've been manipulated so many times, and I do have a soft spot in my heart for many of these Spider-Man movies. I'm actually looking forward to Into the Spider-Verse and Across the Spider-Verse, just to get a different perspective of all of these. From what I understand, it's going to be really interestingly creative and visually dynamic. But this movie, I think, does exactly what I said after the first time I saw it. Is it makes me want to go back and look at the Tobey Maguire and the Andrew Garfield movies.
I feel that's exactly the same thing that Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny is going to do as well. I feel it's going to be emotionally manipulative and just going to make you want to go back and watch the original 3.
Yeah. Can't wait to see it though.
Exactly, and that's the same thing that this film had built into it as well. The member berries, the nostalgia built in. Everybody wanted to see it, even though it's like even before I saw No Way Home, for some reason I wasn't excited for this movie. I mean, I really loved the cliffhanger ending for Far From Home, but I just had no anticipation. I didn't think much of the trailers for this movie. I wasn't really anticipating it at all. And I think part of that was because once it let slip that they're bringing back older characters, I feared that it was just going to be, oh, this is just going to be a dumb member berries thing. It's like, I don't really want to see that. This sounds kind of cheap. And then events transpired that I ended up seeing it opening day anyhow, and I ended up loving it.
Well, I can't blame you. I'm not upset. And I suppose, as you've mentioned it, because next up on after we're done with the Spider-Mans, we're going to be looking at the Indiana Joneses. And I guess that the biggest fear that I have is that it's going to be disposable entertainment, and it's not going to feel like a classic in the same way that those original movies made me feel. And it's the same way this one reminds me of a Spider-Man movie that made me feel feelings. And this one, I was made to feel feelings, as opposed to I was made to feel feelings in those other ones. They encouraged the feelings. This one was like, we know how to get those feelings out of you, young Scott. It's like, all right, yeah, you do. Yeah, you do. It's not that difficult. But yeah.
Should up it to a 9. Maybe I'll give it a 9. Why not?
Oh, it's up to a 9.
It works. It works really well. I'm invested enough in that character.
All right. It's a 6.
Any other comments?
Phantom Boomer still is here and says, bro is still not getting on. I don't know which bro you're referring to, but in case of any further questions, follow-up questions, I'll say yes. Kat, where are you on the internet?
You can find me on YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter at SlySnide. You can find me on the Virtual Cantina Network YouTube channel every second and fourth Sunday of the month, live streaming 8 a.m. Pacific on the Unifying Force, a Star Wars talk show relating Star Wars to the real world and philosophy and religion. And you can find me here on the Fantasmagorium, usually on Wednesday nights. And we got all of our, we got our Bond series, we got our Quentin Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez series, we got the Batman series, now we've got the Spider-Man series. I think that's all of them we're doing so far. And then starting next week, Indiana Jones, so that'll be fun. Got my tickets to see Raiders next Wednesday night, so that'll be fun. Seeing that in the proper theater. So yeah.
Well, and also, don't forget that you and I are both on Cinema Gulp. We just recently talked about some Johnny Depp movies.
Yes, it was quite a fun time. The
It
Secret
I'm looking forward to
Ninth Gate from Hell.
And it's all about Jack the Ripper. which is my favorite Star Trek alien. But yeah, so yeah, thank you everybody. I guess I don't know. I'll hit the
Jack
buttons.
the Ripper, Stephen King, and Roman Polanski.
All of them in one place. The Sinister Three.
Yes.
So I guess I will see you again, and go get them, Tiger.